Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Happy Tuesday. I'm very, very excited today to start our talk, our workshop today on really exploring your personal power. I'm so excited to introduce our guest today. I think I've followed Colette for years. I've really admired the work she's done. I'm so happy that she's agreed to come and share some of her wisdom with us today at Uncommon. To give a brief intro to Colette, she's a professional dominatrix of 20 years. As an educatrix, Colette really teaches about power and the art of femdom and BDSM. She holds a PhD in education from UC Berkeley. Her research focuses on misconceptions and conceptual change. And through her teaching and writing, she really helps to dispel misconceptions about kink, about sex works, about alternative sexuality. And she really, through a lot of and I will share some of her links at the end of the session, but through a lot of the work she does, she guides women and femmes to find and cultivate their personal power by learning how to play with it in the bedroom, in the boardroom, and beyond. I will share more info at the end, but Colette teaches an online dominatrix training and female empowerment course called Mistress Class. I've wanted to join it for a long time. I probably will in the next cycle. It's a bit tricky sometimes with the time zone, but she really guides women on a transformational journey to really take a step and be the dominatrix of their vision. Today, we're going to dive into looking at what aspects of our own lives kind of bound us and hold us back, and what are some of the practices Colette can share and has used to help undo these. She's got a really amazing personal story. Before I hand over to Colette, I want to cover a little bit of housekeeping. We will have some time at the end for Q&A. If you can post it in the chat, you can also DM it to me if you don't want to post it in the chat. Yeah, we will leave some time for it at the end. We're going to follow, as always, like Chatham House rules. So, whatever's discussed here doesn't leave this Zoom room. We really want to uphold some of those uncommon principles of confidentiality, respect for difference, and courageous sharing if we have some time for it later. We record this session, but out of respect for Colette, please don't share any screenshots, any visuals publicly outside of Uncommon. But yeah, without further ado, thank you so much, Colette, for joining us. I will hand over to you now.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you everyone for showing up and being curious enough to explore what I have to share about power and the topic of body image for this month. So a little bit about me. My journey as a Dom began about 20 years ago. I was a grad student at Berkeley, and I was curious about this world because I had a friend who was a dominatrix, and she worked at this house called The Gates, and it's a commercial dungeon. And I'll just share you the defining moment in which I made the choice to become a dom. My friend was taking me out to lunch and sharing with me her day at the dungeon, and she shared that she tied a man up, whipped him, and spanked him and pissed on him, and that was what she did that day. And I was like, whoa, that's such a crazy story. That's your another day at the office. I was like, I want to tell stories like that. And then she whipped out $100 bill to pay for our $12 lunch, and this was back in 2005 before inflation. And she's like, yeah, I just have this problem now because my clients pay me in cash and $100 bills, and so now I have to break $100 bills wherever I go. And I was like, okay, I want problems like that, and I want stories like that. And so I went in for an interview at the gates and began to explore this world with no training really. And we just learned as we went and sessioned and shadowed sessions of other mistresses. And so I didn't have that much of an understanding about what a dominatrix did. And I just slowly or very quickly learned the ropes and fell in love with this work because the people who show up to this space wanting to explore their kinks and desires are just incredibly wonderful, curious, sweet people. And so I just dived in and loved the every aspect about kink. And so I did this for about a decade without telling my family or my parents about what I did. And a decade into it, my sister, who I did share about this work I did, outed me to my mom. And that moment was such a painful, traumatic crisis moment for me because as maybe many of you have the experience of growing up in an Asian household with conservative parents who probably don't understand this world that much, like my family wanted me to quit. And I was torn between making them happy and leaving this world that I love so much, or continue doing what I love doing and make them unhappy. And I chose to continue doing what I did, but also with this vision that maybe at some point they would get it and understand it. And I think that I didn't do a very good job of sharing my world with them. And so they had lots of misconceptions about what kink was and what sex work was. And so I made it a personal mission to dispel misconceptions about kink and alternative sexuality. And it turned out that I got a PhD in misconceptions. And so it kind of like the worlds began to merge. And I started to write about my world and my work. And then I started to teach about it. And it wasn't really until that moment when the truth came out that I began to really examine this world and this work and create a theory behind the practice of what BDSM is. And so what I teach in my class is about BDSM, but it's not just and BDSM is this triple acronym that stands for bondage and discipline, dominance, submission, sadomasochism. And so I share what all of those elements look like inside the dungeon, but I also share what each of these elements look like outside of the dungeon. And I developed a kind of my own philosophy and approach to kink. And I began to see that everything that was happening inside the dungeon is what we're supposed to be practicing outside of the dungeon. So I'm going to share with you what I mean by that because it sounds a little bit cryptic. Like, what does it mean that we should be doing, what we should be practicing BDSM outside of the dungeon? And what I mean by that is I think that BDSM is a highly densely symbolic art and practice of making the unconscious conscious. And I think that's actually how we cultivate and find our power, because
Are you
inside the
here for the
dungeon,
rest of the afternoon? Okay.
Celine, perfect. Is inside the dungeon, everything is very, very conscious and obvious where the power is. The Dom has the power, the sub has given their power to the Dom. And outside of the dungeon, we're sometimes not aware of when we give away our power or we lose our power. And it's usually in the moments of unconscious behavior and unconscious thoughts that we lose our power. And so through this work and practice of exploring BDSM, I share how every element of BDSM allows for us to become more conscious of those unconscious moments when we give away our power and lose our power. And so today we're going to just probably only have enough time to explore these two elements, bondage and discipline. And yeah, we have quite a few of us inside the chat box. So if any of you want to share, if you have any experience with shibari rope bondage or not, please drop it in the chat. Or if this is something that's like completely new to you and you're deeply curious to explore what this looks like. And so for today, I have recruited a friend to be a bondage bottom demo for me, and they are here. And I'm going to have them join us. And yeah, you can come right here. So this is my friend M, and M is going to demo for us a little bit of what bondage looks like today. So before we get started, when was the last time that you experienced bondage?
Maybe a month ago.
A month ago, okay. So you're not like completely new to this. And usually what happens before we get into a scene is that there's a negotiation, but because this isn't like a very typical scene, we're just gonna get into some very light bondage. But just in the case that it gets a little bit too much, there's a safe word that we always establish before we get into session. So do you have a safe word that you wanna use today?
Red.
Red, which is a very typical safe word that we use in the scene. Red meaning let's stop the session, and sometimes yellow is also used to kind of just like say, let's slow down and ease off of this activity. So, all right. Okay, well, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to just pull out a couple of things that that we typically use in the kink space to explore bondage. And the first item is a collar. And a collar is usually a very symbolic element of BDSM, and usually a lot of sessions begin with the dom collaring the sub, and is a way to let them know that they are now being objectified, and their toy, their pet. And so, are you comfortable with me collaring you?
Yes.
All right. Okay, I'm just going to, you could sit right here still. Okay. All right, how does that feel? Feels good, that looks good. Okay, and then with the collar, there's also a leash that comes with it. And are you comfortable with me putting this leash on your collar? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. And this is a blindfold. And are you comfortable with me putting this blindfold on you? All right. So the next object, well, actually, these are a pair of golden handcuffs. Are you comfortable with me handcuffing you?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And one last object here, which you could see as a gag. And I'm gonna have you just hold this in your hand so you could feel it first. And are you comfortable with me putting this gag on you?
Yes.
Okay, and once we have this gag in you, you won't be able to say your safe word. So we're going to establish a non-verbal safe word, and that can be the snap of your fingers. So let's make that the safe word. And so let me see you snap your fingers. Okay, so that's your safe word. Let's have you open your mouth. Okay. Right. Okay, let's have you just face the screen for a moment. Or that's perfect, actually. Standing right there is great. Perfect. So as you can see, M here is in bondage, and they're not able to go anywhere fast or move at all. All of their senses and faculties, the things that would give them power to do something, say something, is taken away. And if they were to try to walk away, I would just make sure that they could stay in place through the leash and collar, and have them position themselves in any way that I'd want. And right now I'm having them stand, but they could also just be on their knees. If you could, yep, just like that. And even though M looks like they don't have any power, in actuality, they have as much power as I do, because with the snap of their fingers, they could have their gag removed. Let's have you snap your fingers. And say if they want to not have the handcuffs on them, they could say their safe word, and I would take off their handcuffs.
Red.
And just like that. You're free. Thank you so much
Thank you.
for being our bottom demo. So that's what bondage looks like inside the dungeon. And outside of the dungeon, I would argue that we all have some bondage that maybe doesn't look as obvious to us as what we just saw on M. But if we weren't in bondage and we were in our fullest power, we would be doing what we want to do, saying what we want to say, being who we want to be in every single moment. And if there's a moment in which we don't feel like we have that power to say what we want to say, do what we want to do, and be who we want to be, then that means that there's some bondage that we have. So I just want you to take a moment to think about what that bondage might be. What are your golden handcuffs? What's that thing that you have in your life that feels secure and feels nice to have, but you also know that it might be holding you back from experiencing true freedom, or maybe pursuing what you truly want to be doing? And what has you on a short leash and collar? Is it emails? Is it your responsibilities? The things that you feel like you have to do and be for others? And what has you blindsided or not being able to see something so clearly? What are your blind spots? And what's your metaphorical gag? What is it that is keeping you from saying what you want to say and being in your fullest expression, being able to express your desires, your feelings, and your boundaries? And I'm going to share with you what my bondage is and the discipline practice that I cultivate to figure my way out of that bondage. So I'm just going to take a moment because there's a lot of bondage. I was the girl who, in high school, would go into the bathroom stalls of the girls' locker room to change because I didn't want anyone to see my body. I was the girl who actually threw up in the stairwell of my dorms in college because that gave me more privacy than the bathroom stalls. I was the girl who didn't feed myself properly, and for 8 months in 11th grade, my hair kept on falling out, and I thought I was going to be bald, and I thought life was so cruel. Like, am I going to have to eat and be fat, or do I starve myself and go bald? I was the girl who took Metabolife, Xantrax, all these diet pills for over a decade. And I didn't stop until my body revolted and was shutting down. And I was shedding blood for 4 months. I was the girl who didn't want to go out in the sun because I didn't want to get a tan, because I didn't want to be brown, I wanted to be white. I was the girl who, at these pivotal ages, from like the transition point from elementary to middle school and high school to college, would beg my mom to change my name because I didn't like how people were mispronouncing my name. And she said, if you change your name, it's going to change who you are. And for decades, I resented her for making me stick out. I was the girl who would have my friends drop me off far away from home because I didn't want them to see where I lived. And where I lived was in the ghettos. And I was the girl who grew up in the 80s before the internet, before there was social media, before there were Asian role models out there. And I looked around to television, to magazines and films to see who I could look up to. And what I saw were girls who were skinny, rich, and white. And that's what I wanted to be. I was the girl who was dying to fit in. And that meant hiding all these parts of myself that I didn't want the world to see. And I was the girl who eventually began to grow up and began to see that I had a lot of choices. And I began to see that perfection is perception, and the only thing that's holding me back from being perfect is the thought that I'm not. The only thing that's holding me back from being perfect is the thought that I am not. And I began to see myself more clearly. Shadow, shame, and all. And I started to see all the choices that I could make. And I started to choose to take care of myself, to feed my body, to love this body. I started to choose to let go of the shame of my body. And I started to choose to love my story, the full story. And the truth is, my parents and my sister emigrated here from war-torn Vietnam on a boat. And my mom had to smear my sister's shit on her thighs so she wouldn't get raped by pirates. And my family only had $200 when they got here. And those $200 was covered in shit. It was my sister's shit because they had to hide it in her diapers. And I'm choosing to love the story that I can tell. And I'm choosing to love every aspect of this story. And I'm choosing to love the name that my mom gave me. My mom named me Yuen. It means erudite in Vietnamese. It means a person who has shown great knowledge and understanding. And it's taken me almost 4 decades of my life to finally learn how to love my name and live up to it. So, thank you for seeing me and hearing my truth. So, why did I do this? I guess it's kind of a lot to kind of strip all of these layers of myself, but I want to share with you that there are so many parts of us, the parts that we want to show the world and the parts that we don't. And then there are the parts that just are waiting to come out. And I did this because I want to show you that change and transformation is possible. If I was that girl with so many insecurities about my body, about my race, about my class, and I'm here teaching you and talking about power, that means that if I could come from all the way there to here, so can you. And transformation is possible. And I share with you this because I think all of us are looking for power. And sometimes we look around us for that power, and we think that maybe power is having the right job, the right house, the right partner, maybe the right purse or shoes. But what happens when we lose our job, lose our partner, lose our home? What happens to our power? We lose it too, because we placed it in these things outside of us. And that's the thing about power. You actually can't see power and grab hold of it, and then it's theirs, and miraculously you have it. Power isn't something that you can see. Power is something that you can feel. And to be in power is to embody power. And to embody power means that power is inside you. And it's inside your truth. And so when I think about the power that we're all looking, a way to find our personal power is by exploring, examining, and expressing our truth. But it's not just any truth, it's the painful truth. It's the truth that you want to hide. It's the truth that you want to run away from, or the truth that you don't want to share. That's the truth that you should be exploring, examining, and expressing. And the alchemy is actually in the expression. It's the moment that you could tell the truth, your truth, shadow, shame, and all, is a moment that you can tell your story. And the moment you could tell your story, you own your story. And the moment that you own your story, you're the author of your story. And the moment that you're the author of your story, you can begin to see all the choices that you can make. And when you can see all the choices that you can make, you can begin to live the story that you want to tell. And so that was my bondage. There was quite a bit of it. And that was the bondage that I hid inside for, I don't know, 3 decades of my life. And I've found that every time I share my deepest shame and my shadow in this way, it frees me. And it feels so good to just have it come out and express it in some way. And maybe it's a little bit tricky for all of us to kind of go there, to go to our deepest shadow and shame and be able to say it. So I want to share with you 2 practices that have really helped me cultivate this personal power and has been the discipline practice that I've cultivated to figure my way out of bondage. And those 2 practices are meditation, and it's a tool that I think all of us actually have. It's a pen. And so I have been journaling and meditating for the past decade, and these 2 practices have been the most powerful practices that I've cultivated. And the reason why I think meditation is so powerful, even though for the longest time I was super resistant to it, because I'm like, I love my thoughts, I love multitasking. Why would you just want to sit there and do nothing? And I didn't realize that I was like the perfect candidate for meditation. And what meditation has allowed me to be able to see is that voice, that nagging voice that I had that was hypercritical, the voice that would say to myself that I'm a cow for wanting to eat, or that I'm for, I don't know, just all the things that I felt like I needed to hide. There was a critical voice that would just be so loud. And I heard that voice more clearly in meditation. And what meditation does, I feel like there's these different levels of it, right? When you first meditate, it's like the most uncomfortable experience ever, and it feels so painful. But then as you keep on sitting with yourself, you realize the reason why it's painful is because you have this voice that keeps on saying, you're thinking, get back to your breath, get back to the present, right? It's like this nagging voice, or at least that was the voice I heard. And I realized the moment that I kind of broke through the first level, as I saw in meditation, was that it's not about clearing your mind and not thinking. It's the moments when you deviate from the breath. It's how you return to that breath with this neutral voice that isn't judging, that just says, thinking, back to breath. And it was just through that practice of that voice that was so hypercritical and judgmental started to soften. And now when I meditate, it's the most blissful experience. And it's because that nagging, hypercritical voice is gone. And it's just allowing me to sit with myself and see myself more clearly. And then the other practice that I've really have enjoyed and learned to love is journaling and writing, and automatic writing sometimes, which is just like writing without picking up the pen, just allowing streams of consciousness to flow, especially in the moments of going through crisis or sadness or something that was really tough. I just write and write until it comes out. And because all of what you saw with M in bondage was that you could see all of the bondage that someone who plays in kink has. And then they could just say they're safe for it and be freed of their bondage. But outside of the dungeon, all of that bondage isn't visible to us because it's not as obvious as this. It's all inside our head. And so we have to find a way to let that come out. And so I want to have us just put into practice these two discipline practices. So I'm going to have us just sit and meditate together for 2 minutes. And so I'd like for you to just find a comfortable position as you are and close your eyes. And see if you could just focus on your breath. Now we could slowly open our eyes. And if you have a pen or a journal or a piece of paper, I'd like for you to grab that pen, open up to a notebook, to a blank page. And I want you to write the words, "The truth I've been hiding from myself is." The truth I've been hiding from myself is. And I want you to start writing for 2 minutes without picking up your pen. Just allow for the streams of consciousness to flow. This is automatic writing for 2 minutes. And you're going to finish the line, "The truth I've been hiding from myself is." I'll just take a moment to wrap up the last line. And now we're going to go to the edge together a little bit. In a moment, we are going to be in breakout rooms of just pairs, and you are going to be paired with another woman here, and you're going to share what you wrote with them. And so everyone will have about 2 to 3 minutes each to share what they wrote, and maybe the person with the shortest hair can be the first to share. And so your role, if you're not sharing, is to just listen and to receive what the other person is sharing. And at the end of their share, thank them for sharing and being vulnerable. And then we'll switch. So I know that if I had told you that you're going to share what you wrote, you probably weren't going to write the truth that wanted to come out. So, so I hope that you can just trust yourself, trust this container, that it's a safe space to share your truth. And so, yeah. Londa, if you want to activate the breakout rooms.
Yep. Okay, 1 second, I'm just moving. Somebody dropped a room, so I'm just moving someone to.
Yeah.
There we go. Oh, people are dropping in and out, so give me 1 second. There we go. Okay.
Right.
Wow, that was. Let me just. Welcome back.
So, welcome back. Maybe some of us are unmuted as we're coming back. Feel free to mute. Yeah, I'm so curious to hear from you what this experience was like. So if you feel like you want to share with us what this experience was like of sharing the truth that wanted to come out, please raise your hand. And thank you all for being so brave in doing this with each other and with me. I know that it's kind of a big push to one's edge to share the truth that maybe you've been hiding, and to be vulnerable in this way with each other. So thank you.
If anyone want to share, I can also pause the recording.
Oh yeah.
Next question.
Okay.
Anyone else have any questions or comments they want to cover today?
I have a question. First of all, thank you so much. It's such an interesting perspective, and also and kind of demystifying some of the perceptions that I have, or that people generally have, about BDSM and the work that you do. And I recognize also that you have to be able to read people really well to do that. So I appreciate that's so amazing to hear. So in the work that you do, does it sometimes suck your emotional bandwidth? And if it does, who do you engage to sort of have really honest conversations with? Like, man, this client I had is a real pain in the ass. Like how do you have these really safe conversations?
Yeah, I definitely have those conversations with my colleagues and friends who are also dominatrixes as well. And yeah, I would say that this work can be really, it's a lot of emotional labor to like show up and be present and to be completely attuned to someone and how they feel and try to find ways to kind of seduce them, to push them to their edges, and then bring them back and put them back together after you dismantle their ego. And so I would say like the first decade of being a pro dom, I didn't have very good boundaries, and I kind of just felt like I should be taking as many sessions as I can because I just thought that the more money, the better. And so I wasn't that discriminatory about like who I was sessioning with until I got to a point where I was sessioning for like 30, 40 hours a week, which is a lot because there's like the time to set up the scene, the time to like, break down the scene. So it was like a ton of time and energy, and I got burnt out. And at the point in which I got burnt out, I also kind of declared email bankruptcy, stopped replying to people, and I started to only see clients that energized me, that I look forward to seeing, and didn't need to take up a lot of my time communicating back and forth in email. And so I kind of weeded out a lot of people. And now I only see people who I'm excited to see, and they just feel like they're my friends, and we get to be kinky in a scene. And so, yeah, it took about a decade to really figure out that if I wanted to continue doing this work, I had to take care of myself first and choose my time and energy over money. And I think something that I also thought about was just like, I used to think power was money, and that's why I couldn't say no to the money and no to the sessions. But then I redefined what power was, and power for me was self-care and taking care of myself and giving myself that time back.
Thank you. It reminds me, I know you were talking about money and energy, and I was thinking about someone told me once, treat your energy the way you treat your money. And like you wouldn't spend it on something that
Yeah.
had
Oh,
no.
that's nice. I like that.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. Thank you for asking.
Thanks. We have another question from Krati in the chat. Just
It's hard to truly be yourself, and power can often be associated with formal positions of authority. How do you navigate power in the workplace and find a way to own your power regardless of organizational hierarchy? Yeah, no, it's tricky. I think I've like somehow kind of like avoided all, maybe that's why I have the job that I have, is because I can't stand authority and like being in some position where I have to defer to an authority figure. So I'm like, oh, therefore I have to be the authority figure and be the dom. So I don't have that much experience in the corporate world, but I think what I would say is that it's definitely tricky, because I feel like power is so like pervasive. It's all around us. We're always constantly negotiating it in an unconscious level. And I would say that being able to express yourself, I think, is such an important thing. And the moments in which you feel like you can't speak up for what you want, and or stick up for somebody else, that's the moment when I think you can begin to kind of just like be aware of those moments when that you don't feel like you have that power, and examine why is it that I feel like I can't speak up right now, and think about maybe next time when there's an opportunity I would speak up, right? And so it's just, I think that our power is our voice and our power is our truth. And every time that we feel like we are being silenced or we can't speak the truth, that's the moment in which we're kind of unconsciously giving away our power. And but I guess I do have something that can be applicable that kind of works inside the dungeon, outside the dungeon. So this is a little doodle that I drew for my class, and it says the Dom is subconscious and the sub is self-conscious. So you can see the Dom here is very conscious of the sub. Her like perception is right on the sub. She's aware of the sub, and the sub is kind of his perception or their perception is inward on themselves, on their fantasy. And so how I think about like when I'm being the Dom, I'm not self-conscious. I'm not thinking, ooh, do I sound like a Dom? And do I sound powerful enough? I'm not conscious of myself. I'm fully present with the sub. I'm thinking about what they're thinking. I'm thinking about their desires. I'm focused on them. And the moment that I'm becoming self-conscious is a moment that I'm not the Dom anymore. I'm playing the sub. And so in any scene or any situation, if you're self-conscious, you will find that you're going to lose your ability to speak, do, or act. And so the more present that you can be, the more present that you could be with the people in the space that you're in, the more present you are, then the more that you have the power to be able to navigate the scene, the situation, and guide it. But if you're self-conscious and feeling like you can't, if you're self-conscious, you can't guide the situation, you can't speak up. And so every time you're feeling self-conscious, just be aware, how can I be present? How can I focus on the other? How can I get curious and guide this situation? Yeah.
I don't know if we have time for one more quick question, but I think we're already over. But if anyone has a pressing one that they want to ask Colette, now would be the moment. Okay. So I want to, on behalf of everyone at Uncommon, I really want to thank Colette for joining us today for such an incredible session that I think is going to resonate and ripple out into everybody's workday today and beyond that. You know, really loved the exercise, love hearing your story, and come back to that idea of one's owning one's stories, one's choices is really power. So thank you so much for that. What I am going to do is share Colette's links, and we are going to follow up with a website and everything. She has an incredible writing class that is coming up very soon. She's also got a mistress class kicking off in the autumn. So I'm going to share those links here, but we'll also follow up with an email. And yeah, so grateful to have you today at Uncommon today, Colette. I hope you had as much fun as we did.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy that I get to just be with all of you in this space. And I love that we're all kind of have similar shared experiences of being Asian and navigating power in challenging spaces. And so I hope that what I shared was helpful. And if just even a seed was planted, that's great. So thank you so much. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day and hope to see you in some other space in the future.